Building Growth, the New Anglo Local Enterprise Partnership. Delighted you could all join us this morning. I think we've got about 150 signed up and over 100 online now, so that's terrific. So thank you very much for doing that. The last time we had one of these gatherings on 21st of May, and of course we were in, were we just at the end of a lockdown then, or were we middle of a lockdown then? I've lost track. But whatever it was the first time any of us had experienced living through a pandemic, and we had, I think, 180 sign up for that event. Two of you have come back as speakers. Richard Bacon, thank you very much for coming back again. Tim Pike, thank you very much for coming back again. Those two came back because they were terrific and because they set a continuous part of the agenda, the MP for our region, and the MP that initiated Building Growth and shaped North's future. And Tim Pike, the economist, and the economy is part of all we've been talking about. Tim's also an expert epidemiologist, and that's terrific. In addition to those two speakers today, we're going to hear from CJ Green. CJ's just taken over as chair of New Anglo Partnership, so welcome CJ, reporting from you. A bit more of a local context about where we are. Joanna Barrett from Flagship's going to talk to us about the planning white paper and other changes in planning, so thank you for that, Jo. Tom McGarry is going to talk to us, perhaps with Guy Hazelhurst of EDF, about Sizewell C. Lynn Gladden is going to talk to us about Cambridge Tech Corridor, Cambridge Norwich Tech Corridor, and as I say, Tim last. I think everyone's going to be about a quarter of an hour each, approximately, but the Q&A could stretch. Things might take a little more, a little less. So if my maths is right, we should be all done in about 2 hours, even allowing for some Q&A. I hope that works for you all. I didn't intend to say too much today, other than to sort of say hi and welcome you and to introduce speakers. The format, I guess, if we keep ourselves muted unless we're talking, perhaps put our hand up if you want something to say urgently, or wait till the end of a speaker, or we can keep a conversation running in the background. So we know how these things work now. We can do what's needed to contribute. The usual agenda for Building Growth is to address the things that affect our industry the most. Skills, that's housing, that's infrastructure, utilities, that's planning. Many of them are coming up again today, but now very much in the context of a pandemic and perhaps a recession. Some would say inevitably a recession. So without too much further ado, I'd like to sort of kick matters off. But just one final thing I would like to say before that, and that is just to extend my sympathy and support to anyone who has been affected by this COVID-19 disaster, and in particular to reach out to the late Tony Pidgley and his family. Tony was our leading speaker 2 sessions ago, and he led Berkeley Homes. Unfortunately, many of you will know that Tony passed away earlier this year. So thoughts go out to everybody affected, but on a more positive note, I wonder if I could ask Richard Bacon, MP for South Norfolk, to kick us off this morning and to perhaps give us some national context as to where we are. We have all read the news, Richard. We're probably aware of the 3-tier system. We know your good friend Keir Starmer's had a little bit to say in the last few days. And I look forward to hearing all of that and more, with a little bit of Brexit and climate change and who knows what thrown in. Richard Bacon, over to you. Can we just take Richard off mute? Richard, can anybody hear Richard yet? Katie, can you control Richard?
I'm off mute now, I think.
Ah, that's well done. Brilliant.
Good. So I'll say the word Brexit once and you won't hear it from me again. That's that dealt with. Thank you very much, Saul. I've got my stopwatch going, so I'll keep an eye on the time, which is the only way to control me. So I'll control myself. National context. You mentioned the Keir Starmer point. I was discussing this with my wife this morning. It's obviously, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about COVID, because anybody who listens to the Today programme gets 18 hours a day of COVID, 18 hours a week of COVID anyway, because you can turn the radio on at any point and it's all they're ever discussing, as if human life has basically stopped. And so I won't go on about it. It's obviously a clever political move by Keir Starmer on the basis that if he turns out to be right and there is a need for a national lockdown, which the government is going very hard to try and avoid, he'll be able to say, but if only you'd done it earlier. if there isn't one, then nobody will forget that no one will remember that he said it. So he's in a sort of win-win position, really. And I think it's not therefore surprising that he's trying to make political capital out of it. But the one thing that doesn't get mentioned sufficiently, I think, is that the following of the science is something that you expect scientists to do and you expect governments to be influenced by. But when the World Health Organization itself in the UK to try, if it possibly can, to avoid a national lockdown, then one realizes there are other things going on, because the government not only has to listen to the scientific advice, it has to listen to the social advice, the health advice, the mental health advice, the economic advice, and put all of those in a hopper and come up with a solution that takes account of all of them. And a point that I think we focus on too little is that there comes a point when you have nothing left to tax. Now, we're nowhere near that point yet, and the economy hasn't been completely destroyed, but you can see how if one were to carry on hard enough for long enough, there wouldn't be much hope of economic recovery, because we would have destroyed our capacity for economic recovery. And, oh, by the way, our capacity to pay through our tax base for things like the health service that we need and other vital public services. So that's all I'm going to say about COVID. I'd rather talk about the agenda of construction and housing and how we recover Anglia. It seems to me there's a very odd paradox that's been going on for many years now. We have plenty of land. Most land in the UK is not built upon. We have plenty of finance. We've heard for years now, it hasn't gone away, a wall of money. In fact, I was sitting next to Rishi when he was still Chief Secretary at a lunch at the Institute of Economic Affairs, I think it was just last year. And he said he worked in investment. He said, as a global investor, I would look at the UK with its, you're looking as a global investor, he said, for supernormal profits. You're looking for an outsized profit you can get for a while, and you get in early enough, you get that, and then other people move in, and through a natural process of competition, those excess or supernormal profits, as an economist would call them, are winnowed away. But as an investor, that's what I'm looking for. He then said, looking at the UK from a global perspective as an investment opportunity, the property and residential market is a huge opportunity, because there are permanent supernormal profits. That ought, of course, not to be allowed. So we have enough finance, and we have plenty of people who need housing, and yet we don't still have a system that works. We had, with Greg Clark years ago, the winnowing down, the more than winnowing down, the hacking away at the undergrowth of the planning rules, where there were 1,300 pages. So only a small priestly caste of planning silks and their advisors and friends in the legal fraternity could begin to work their way through it. And rather like the Bible, there was enough in there to find through exegesis whichever answer you wanted, which, given that planning is necessarily about balancing intrinsic constraints that are intrinsically opposed to one another, is hardly surprising, and one ought to be able to do that rather more simply. And that was the purpose of hacking away that 1,300 pages and turning it into 52 pages of the National Planning Policy Framework, although, of course, that's grown a bit since. I was on a Zoom call recently where one of the participants said, we're talking about the private rental sector, and he said, you do realise, don't you, that in the last, I think it was 12 or 14 years, he said, perhaps it was less, but the figure he came up with was we built 1.67 million houses in recent years, and yet during the same period, the number of people in the private sector has gone up. So, and he concluded, in my view erroneously, so it can't be just about building more houses, can it? I was watching the coverage in response to the recent planning white paper, and I know we have a speaker who's going to talk about that, Joanna from Flagship, shortly, so I won't dwell on it. But I saw the Royal Town Planning Institute response saying, well, of course, you have to remember that 9 in 10 planning permissions are granted. And moreover, of course, there are 1 million extant unbuilt out planning permissions. So it can't be about the planning system, can it? And indeed, Jenny Daly, who is the operations director of Taylor Wimpey, I sat next to her at a party conference fringe meeting a year or so ago, perhaps it was the year before last, I can't remember, and asked the question, what's wrong with the planning system? She replied, well, do you know, I actually think the planning system's in a pretty good place. It's really not too bad. And we just had a young man come in who's from a farming family. They'd spent 13 years trying to get planning permission for a site for some houses, and they'd finally got it. He was very excited. He started chatting to me as we walked into the meeting. And then then I said, so you'll be breaking ground in the next few weeks? Oh no, he said, it's probably about another year or 18 months. So I said to Jenny Daly, the Taylor Wimpey operations director, are we seriously to suggest that if only we had a few more planners, because the criticism you often hear is that planning departments are under-resourced, which is almost certainly true. If we had a few more people in the planning departments, so that it only took just over 1 Second World War to get something done rather than 2 Second World Wars, that we would have somehow solved the problem. I don't think that we're anywhere near solving the problem yet. I think the system we have is intellectually, socially and morally bankrupt. It's intellectually bankrupt because the supply of housing doesn't rise to meet demand for housing. It's socially bankrupt because not having a system in which everyone can easily get a dwelling at a price they can afford, or people on normal incomes getting something that they can afford and preferably to buy, because 86% of people want to buy, but many can't. And it's morally bankrupt because if we're a rich country, we really ought to be able to do better than this. And I think you can sum up the housing, the policy, my housing policy, in 5 words. Everyone needs somewhere to live. The only question then is how we get that. It's very interesting after COVID broke, and the government really made a big effort to get homeless people off the streets and almost entirely succeeded. It wasn't completely successful for understandable reasons that everyone will know about, but it was extremely successful. And Shelter, the housing charity, called it a landmark moment. And in a way it was. But what it showed us is that if we want to do something badly enough, then we can. I think, unlike those who came to see Parliament and government departments and sat down in the middle of the street for several weeks last summer, who basically, from Extinction Rebellion, who said, I remember one of them being lovingly quoted on the BBC as if it were a sensible point. The thing is, you see, she said, we can't change anything until we've changed everything. The cry of failed revolutionaries throughout history, and by the way, the cry of successful revolutionaries when it all goes wrong afterwards. We don't need to change everything at once, but there are actually three things we need to do, and I think this will make a big difference. First of all, we need to break down the barriers to entry. We need to make it very easy for ordinary people to get a service plot of land at a price that an ordinary person on a normal income can afford. And this can be done. It can be done by government. The price of permissioned land is determined by government, because it's government that determines the supply of permissioned land. And of course, we should put in conditions in terms of planning permission should not be a grant with a pen that then one of these that then gives you a sudden asset that you can sit on forever. It is a grant conferred on you by society because we, through this pen, collectively decide it's something we want you to be able to do. And you have rights to do it because of what we've said through planning permission, but that should also come with responsibilities. And it'd be very easy to set up responsibilities where you must build within a certain time period. If you get a serviced plot of land in Almere in the Netherlands, it comes with a plot passport. You know you'll get planning permission. There's no question about whether you get planning permission or not. That risk is completely de-risked. It's gone away. But also you must do it within 36 months. And if you don't, there are punitive penalties. We could easily fix this. Whether there's a political will to fix it is another matter, but we could easily fix it. The second thing we need to do, as well as lowering barriers to entry, is, and this will actually help with the first thing, increase choice massively, because we know that most people don't want to buy the products of volume house builders. The Home Builders Federation, the representatives of the two Wimpys as well, themselves say through their own research that only 33% of people want to buy their product, and most people don't want to buy it. And yet, most people don't have any choice. The volume house builders who supply things that most people don't want, nonetheless, supply 80% of the product in the UK. And as we all know, it's become much more intense in recent years. So if we give people access to land much more easily and lower barriers to entry, and I do mean service plots, because that is itself a barrier if you have to worry about things like electricity and water and broadband. That all needs to be dealt with, in my view, by the public sector. And not just on a cost recovery basis. It could easily be made slightly profitable if you wanted to. And if you had the right structure, you'd easily attract the capital to do it. You then give people the real choice, and you have a flourishing and a flowering of quality. So we get better, larger, greener, more sustainable homes at keener prices. And then the volume house builders can either go out of business or adapt and start providing what more customers want. The third thing you have to do is streamline local government, so that instead of having, for example, eight councils in Norfolk, we have perhaps one council. That's then, with 1 million people, a large enough entity to go to international capital markets and raise money to build not some, but all of the infrastructure we need to make this a global hub of growth. We're already growing in East Anglia. I mean, this is obviously, these are not COVID numbers, but we are growing in East Anglia faster than almost everywhere in the United Kingdom outside of London, the southeast itself. We're net contributors to the Exchequer, with the enormous golden triangle between Cambridge and the Norwich Research Park, and thousands of world-class scientists there, and the world-class research going on at the Adastral Labs in Ipswich. We could easily become a golden triangle, a global hub for investment. And seen from Mumbai or Shanghai or Dubai, that would be very, very attractive if we had the right infrastructure. And a county of our size, indeed Norfolk and Suffolk between them, could easily absorb many, many more hundreds of thousands of people. We could absorb a city the size of Milton Keynes without thinking about it. And I know somebody's later going to talk about the corridor from Cambridge to Norwich. I often hear people talking about the Oxford to Milton Keynes to Cambridge corridor. I would prefer to talk about the Bristol to Norwich corridor. That's the Bristol to Oxford to Milton Keynes to Cambridge to Norwich corridor. Because if we actually were able to get across the country rather than just up and down, by the way, we should be doing the same up north as well and at the same time. I had a colleague who we visited Sellafield a few years ago, and the people going from London got there quicker than the bloke in the northeast, even though he had a third of the distance to travel, because it's so difficult to get across from one side of England to the other in the north. But it's also very difficult in the south and across the Midlands. So we need to change all that. And then I'm on 12 minutes, 35 seconds. I'll stop in a second. So those three things: lowering barriers to entry, increasing choice, and reforming and streamlining local government. So instead of being a supplicant to central government and having idiots like that fellow at the Highways Agency saying something that was crass and untrue, like the Acle Strait will never be dualled, so that all the Norfolk MPs had to get together in a room with the Transport Minister and persuade her to sign her name in blood to the fact that it was untrue. Instead of being supplicants like that, we'd actually be doing it ourselves, and that's what we should be doing.
Richard, thank you. Was that ahead of time? Was that
13 minutes 14 seconds?
That's remarkable. Well done. Thank you very much. I know you've been campaigning for self-build and greater choice for a long while. The How Should Norfolk Grow events that you hosted often focused on that part of the agenda, and thank you for bringing that back to us today. It's interesting that government policy at the moment seems to be focused more around the white paper and the revised standard methodology. Do you think either of those initiatives will make a difference?
I think the direction of travel in the white paper of having zoning and having greater clarity is the right one. I think most of the problems we face are to do with risk, whether it's risk about whether you get planning permission or not, risk about whether you get infrastructure or not, risk about whether you get finance or not, and that most of getting progress quickly is about having clarity and reducing risk. And these are all very easy things to do. We got a man to the moon 51 years ago. It's a hell of a lot simpler to give somebody a plot passport and say, you will definitely have planning permission if you build here on this plot, and we will definitely have infrastructure for you. Here's our contract that says we will provide the broadband and the water and the services and so on. These are not complicated things to do, but they require consistency, vision, and political will.
And we haven't said much at all. You mentioned Extinction Rebellion, the net zero agenda, the carbon crisis. Do you think we're addressing that properly too?
I think the net zero agenda has not gone away. It's still reverberating around inside government. I happen to hear some of this because my wife, who's currently working from home, is a civil servant, and I do hear the phrase net zero being bandied around quite a lot. So it hasn't gone away. My own view is that as far as the housing piece is concerned, there's a very great deal that we could be doing to contribute to this, because there's nobody who doesn't want a house that costs nothing to heat. There's nobody who doesn't want a really green house that is sustainable for the future and that is extremely that has extremely high thermal performance and that will last for a very long time. So I think there's a huge alignment there, actually, if we just bother to seize it.
Thank you. I think it's difficult for others to immediately ask a question if they're muted, but now that Jonathan Cage has stopped sharing his screen, we probably could put our hands up or communicate in that manner if we wish. So please do that, or contribute to the chat button. We haven't got Richard for long this morning, and I didn't want to hog him forever, but feel free to do that as you wish. I guess, can I see Mark's hand going up there? Can we go to Mark? I'm not sure how quickly we can do this. Katie, are you in control of unmuting?
Okay, I seem to have unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
I can, Mark.
Thank you. Mark Goyder. I live on the east coast of Suffolk, near Leiston. Recently, in a village near us, a very enterprising group of residents of the village of Westleton put together a proposal to make use of land around the church and a redundant vicarage for sheltered housing, for semi-independent living for people who mostly were intended to be people from the village. The planning authority, the church commissioners were happy with the proposal. The money was raised. The planning authority turned down the proposal on the grounds of aesthetics, that it was incompatible with the character of the church, and on the grounds of technicalities around planning envelopes. I'd like to put it to our speaker that what we need is a holistic approach to planning, where issues like the future health and well-being of communities become criteria in planning, rather than being subordinated to planning technicalities.
We are in violent agreement. I didn't use the word holistic, but I have often used it in events that I've attended, and I find it extraordinary, to take the most obvious example, why we would think of building dwellings without making sure that all the infrastructure, by which I mean the doctors' surgeries, the primary school, the broadband, and all these other things, were in place first. And if they can manage it in Switzerland and they can manage it in Saudi Arabia, I was visiting Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago to look at the damage done by the Houthis in clinics and hospitals in the extreme southwest. And as we flew in, I could see areas of land which had roads already in and one or two buildings. And I realized I was looking at serviced plots. And they do it in Switzerland, where they're extremely, as you might expect, extremely well kept and extremely green, but they know way in advance where the next houses are going. And the objections we often get to housing are on the basis that it's not attractive enough, but more often they're on the basis the sewers can't cope. Well, the obvious answer to that is build better sewers and do it first. Or how will the doctor surgery cope? Or, you know, we won't have any room on the bus. Well, put more buses on. You know, there is a place in Cambridge in Camborne, where I was there a couple of years ago. They've built a huge school that's going to take 1,500, 2,000 pupils. When I went to visit it, it was sitting there almost isolated in the field. But they know that they're going to be putting houses around it. So doing things in the right order and keeping people on board is very, very important. As for the aesthetics side of things, I mean, I'm very, very glad Nick Boyce-Smith is now heavily involved in government, because he's done a great deal on this. I don't know if Gail is on the call. She was one of the Gail Mayhew, she was one of the Building Better commissioners. And they, I hope, have moved the dial a bit on this. And there are local council officers who try and get involved in decisions which are really nothing to do with them at all. It's simply a fact that aesthetics vary, and there are different views on what ought to happen. Anybody who goes to Blandford Forum in Dorset will see some of the most beautiful Georgian architecture in England, but the only reason it's there is there was an enormous fire, as big for its size as the Great Fire of London, that destroyed everything beforehand, most of which was old sort of timber-framed buildings. And it certainly, what was put there instead certainly wasn't in keeping with what had been there before. I think what we have to listen to people. I mean, Nick Boyce-Smith is very fond of making this point, and he's done a lot of work to show that architects actually, in many cases, hate. They hate create streets, because he actually asks people what they want. There are many architects who hate Poundbury, and in polite conversation, and I've encountered this many times, it's become quite normal to hate Poundbury, the Prince of Wales's village in Dorset, without ever having visited it. Because enough architects have influenced the milieu and the conversation that polite opinion formers have about it that they think it's dreadful, or they've never been there and they know nothing about it. I think you've got to put the people who are going to be the consumers in charge of what it looks like, just like we do for green corduroy trousers and for blue cars. You don't have the government telling you what colour your car has to be. Yes, you might have a specification as to whether it can go into the ultra low emission zone without paying an extra fee if it's not very green in the carbon sense. But we should give people much more freedom of choice. It's not for the local council to tell you what colour your gutter ought to be. It really isn't. And we've got to wake up and get with it. Otherwise, we're not going to solve this problem. And eventually, I mean, I'm very concerned that if we don't get centrist, centre-right solution that allows people to have choice. We will end up getting a left-wing solution, which, having myself worked in East Berlin just after the wall came down, I know what left-wing solutions to housing often look like, and they don't involve choice very often, and they tend to be top-down, whereas what we actually need is bottom-up. People in the parish in Westleton, which I know well, I know the Westleton Crown, the parish council should have been making the final decision. And if they made the wrong decision, I can guarantee you power there would suddenly be a bit more competition to get on the Westleton Parish Council. Whereas at the moment, most parish councils struggle to fill the slots and they end up co-opting people. And they're usually the people who are most likely to sit back in the chair, fold their arms, go, oh, I don't like that. Whereas actually what we want is real power to devolve to people who can make a difference. And if they see that it will make a difference, they will then seize it and exercise it.
Richard, I can see quite a lot of notes coming in on the chat. Simeon's kindly pointed out that Gail's view may have slightly differed from the official Building Britain Beautiful report, or whatever that mouthful was. In terms of left-wing solutions, if I was just a little bit more open and holistic, should we give credit to Goldsmith Street? Richard, are you there?
Sorry, should we give credit to where?
To Goldsmith Street, the Sterling Prize winning.
Yeah, I'm not against. Well, in the last 2 years, I have been called an extreme libertarian and a communist by colleagues of mine. So I don't know what I am. I just think, going back to my housing policy, everyone needs somewhere to live. It's also, I think, it's axiomatically the case that there are some people who will never own their own home. But I think most people who say that start with a sort of, not all, but some of them start with a sort of poverty of ambition, that because it's true that some people will never own their own home, we ought to lessen our ambition about how many people should own their own home. And I think this is fundamentally flawed for two reasons. First of all, we know most people want to, even though they don't see how they're going to do it. But even more importantly, and Richard Best, who's a crossbench peer in the House of Lords, made this point in a paper that he did last year on the consequences of being in the private rental sector when you retire. We've a whole generation of people coming along now between the ages of roughly 35 to 50 who have not been able to get on the property ladder, and they're still in the private rental sector. Some of them have been forced into it. Julie Rugg at the University of, I think it's the University of York Housing Centre, did some work on this, pointing out that a lot of people who are in the private rented sector, it's for them a proxy for not being in the ownership market when they would like to be. And for some, it's a proxy for not being in the social housing sector when that's where they ought to be. But if, and Richard made this point very well in the paper, we've got this whole generation of people who've not been able to buy. What's going to happen in 15 to 20 years' time when they're 65 to 70 and they start retiring? Their income will drop like a stone, of course, because generally your income is only a third of what it is when you're working in retirement. But hopefully, because you own your own property, your costs are much lower as well. But in this case, the landlord will not be saying, the private sector landlord won't be saying, well, I understand your revenue, your income has fallen substantially. Of course, I'll drop my rent substantially. That won't happen. So we have an entire generation. There are 400,000 people currently over the age of 65 living in private rented sector accommodation. That's going to be 1.2, 1.4, 1.5 million in 20 years' time if we don't do something about it. And guess who's going to pick up the tab? You are, as taxpayers. So there are some very good reasons for encouraging as much ownership as humanly possible, while recognizing that for the want of a better proxy for a way of describing it, I'll call left-wing solutions. But it's amazing how many Conservative colleagues there was a housing debate last week in the House of Commons, which I listened to the whole of. A number of them were saying we've got to be much more open and explicit about our support for social housing, and I think that that's true. There are lots of good schemes out there that are intended to be in perpetuity social housing, and we do need in perpetuity social housing. We should find ways of making it in perpetuity. I personally think the housing co-ops have got a huge amount to offer in that respect, because they are completely out with the provisions of right to buy. If you think about what a co-op is, it's a private to private contract. But many local authorities on the left, and I've discussed this with some of them, indeed in the committee stage of the Housing and Planning Bill, which I was on the committee for, they don't like it because they feel that they're losing control. But actually, the people who are gaining control are the people who are living in the properties. And that's what happens in Germany. It's what happens elsewhere on the continent, and we should be doing more of that.
Thank you, Richard. As usual, that's a fantastic contribution and really appreciate it. just in closure, I see Mark Goyd has added to the chat that just to focus on joining up that health and wellbeing agenda with the housing agenda. I think would be appreciated by all. But what you said is very appreciated. And thank you for joining us. I know you're a busy man.
By the way, an architect mentioned to me that clay lump houses, of course, which we've had hundreds, thousands built in East Anglia over the last 200 or 300 years, 400 years, are intrinsically healthier. You get lower rates of respiratory disease, and there's a lot to be said. And I didn't talk about it, I'm sorry, but there is a big healthy housing piece, which is partly to do with thermal performance and energy, but also partly to do with the right kind of circulation of air and lower levels of disease as a result. And it's a big topic in itself. I do realise that.
Richard, thank you. And also thank you for taking me to Poundbury some months ago. And I did enjoy it. And Mark, thank you for your contribution and also for the suppers that we've enjoyed, having similar interesting conversations. Can I speakers now thank Richard for his contribution and ask CJ Green to unmute herself. New chair of New Anglia Enterprise Partnership, and it's great that you've joined us so soon into your reign, CJ. It's really appreciated. For those of you who don't know CJ, she currently also leads Brave Goose, a company that she founded that's tech-driven HR business, and was previously the Chief Executive Officer of Service with, I think, 50,000 employees at one point, so a huge business. CJ, we're honoured to have you with us today, and I wonder if you can give us a little bit of local context into where we are and where we're going.
Of course, thank you, Saul, and good morning, everyone. I'm 3 weeks in, so don't expect buckets and buckets of knowledge because I'm still very much on a very steep learning curve with everything connected to the LEP, but it's fantastic to have a really early opportunity to join you all this morning. I don't have to kind of go into all the trauma and drama of what we're all going through at the moment. I'm very much going to talk to you about kind of the LEP context and what we're doing to really kind of push things forward and working with partners. So from a LEP perspective, there's alongside our local partners, there's a really clear shared vision to drive low carbon, inclusive economic growth across Norfolk and Suffolk. And the thing that I've been really excited by is how passionate the commitment to work together to transform our local economy into one of the best places to live, work, learn and flourish. And that's an ambition that, you know, since joining the board in spring and succeeding as chair, it's an ambition that very much firmly still stands. The Norfolk and Suffolk Economic Recovery Plan saw our local partners commit to supporting the construction sector in particular through continued investment in some key infrastructure projects. And we're really pushing to continue to make compelling case to government to fund priority schemes for the region. New Anglia LEP has been awarded an additional 32.1 million through the government's Getting Building Fund, which really is aimed at kickstarting projects across both counties. And it's all required to be delivered by March next year. So we're hoping this will really bolster the sector and keep people in work. The pandemic has really demonstrated the need for resilient, adaptable infrastructure, and it's changed the way that businesses and communities use services. I know kind of everyone's world of work and sense of community has almost been turned on its head through kind of what we've all been through. You know, there's been some positive elements that have come out of the pandemic, dare I say it, but traffic flows have dropped to a fifth of normal levels on our major road networks. And water and energy use has really shifted with kind of afternoon peaks as the trends for home working has accelerated. And I can't see kind of too much of a total shift on the horizon with people going back into office, hurrying back into office environments. Lots of our local authorities have declared climate change emergencies, and there's more commitment to low carbon growth. And so in front of us, there's a real opportunity to accelerate the transition to a greener economy. So really kind of embedding these adaptations and practices that we're kind of seeing coming through, which I think is one element of real positivity for us, which we shouldn't lose as we kind of move forward into the future. We obviously, Norfolk and Suffolk has a really large and diverse construction sector. Lots of modern methods of construction and sustainable design emerging, which is enormously exciting, and something that I confess I didn't have a huge awareness of before my connection with the LEP, but absolutely fascinating. So low carbon developments and the circular economy principles in housing forming a major part of our recovery and renewal. As you can imagine, there's understandable caution around investing in new office developments with our shift to home working and alongside a potential slowdown in the housing market, which could have impacts on the sector over the coming 12 months. But demand for different types of housing, from specialist housing for people with care needs to affordable housing, as we've been talking about, really does remain a priority. And Norfolk and Suffolk have significant investment infrastructure priorities that could benefit from government recovery funding and provide much needed jobs and economic boost. We know that the construction sector could lead the charge in terms of jobs and kind of the growth of jobs, where we're seeing lots of contraction across the country. And so we want to ensure that there's a collaborative approach to this roadmap to a recovery, and this has really been kind of endorsed by local partners. And I have been encouraged that in the face of adversity, that the amount of collaboration and connection is really, the intent is really there to do good work as we kind of move into a restart phase. So kind of just to conclude and not talk to you and rant at you too long, we're continuing to work with partners across the counties and with government to restart and have recovery efforts. Most recently, the LEP have worked incredibly hard with public health teams that have managed outbreaks in businesses in our region. Our restart plan that was published in June is being reviewed, and it will be updated and shared later in the autumn with kind of new initiatives and focus for the region. And our job support programme launched in September, which has an online portal for those facing redundancy or looking to get back into work, with loads of free resources and information. And I was lucky enough to be with the DWP yesterday talking about the Kickstart scheme that provides funds for job placements for young people. So this is really recognising that young people could be disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and what work we can do to really kind of get that moving and making sure that they're supported, as they're going through a very challenging time. So kind of, I'm really pleased to be joining you all this morning, and I look forward to building a great relationship with you in the sector in order to support recovery in our region. I'd be really interested to hear kind of what measures would be useful for you in the sector for us to include in our recovery plans. But for now, I will kind of cease talking and hand back to Saul. Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure to see you all this morning.
CJ, thank you. That's really appreciated. You have a couple of things you mentioned there, working together. Do you think now is the time for local government review? Is devolution a subject we should be discussing, or is that for another day?
I don't know. I mean, you can continually kick the can down the road. I think it's always important to be having the discussion. So, I think Richard mentioned we can't, the world can't stop and us only have pandemic to talk about. We do need to continue to have important conversations outside just COVID-19, which I'm sure we're all absolutely sick of.
I think you're right in that regard, CJ. We mentioned growth once or twice, but you also mentioned the circular economy concept, and we probably all know about donut economics now and other ideas that wouldn't have crossed my boat normally as a construction person. But is growth the right thing to continue to be aspiring for?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I may be being completely glass half full, but we can't abandon aspirations around growth, because actually it's important for us to kind of make some bold commitments. And I think, recovery and our efforts to really kind of support the region with recovery is important, but I think it is important to focus on growth. And as a region, there is some extraordinary businesses and some really unique and innovative kind of sectors. And so I think why wouldn't we want to set our ambitions high? Because as a region, I think we're capable of it.
CJ, thank you. I think perhaps one of the well, there's two massive things that contribute to construction economics and employment. Housing and a buoyant housing market is a massive part of that, and there's a number of house builders on the line this morning. I guess infrastructure is another, and we're going to hear from Tom McGarry and Guy shortly, in terms of the sheer numbers of people that could be employed at Sizewell C. I think it's 25,000 jobs that could be created there. Tom and Guy will correct me, no doubt, shortly. But whatever it is, it's a huge impact on our society, and getting that right is something really important. So, CJ, thank you for your leadership of New Anglia LEP, and good luck with your reign as chair.
Thank you. Good to join you all this morning.
No, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you. Perhaps I can now switch from CJ to Joanna Barrett. If Joanna can unmute herself, it'd be great to hear from Joanna, who's going to talk to us about the planning white paper, planning for the future. And I wonder if perhaps also mention the revised standard method for housing need. They're two incredibly controversial subjects. And I wonder if, Jo, you could lead us through that agenda.
Thank you. Yeah, really good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm just going to share my screen. Are you able to see that?
Yes, thank you.
Right, OK, because once you take over the mantle and start to speak, you're never too sure if people are still on the other end. So, OK, so Jo Barrett, so I work on policy issues for the Flagship Group. Who we are. So Flagship Group, we're a housing association, quite a large housing association, and the majority of our homes are in Norfolk and Suffolk. We also have stock in Cambridgeshire and Essex, so very much focused on the eastern region. Our mission is to provide homes to people in need. We've got about 30,000 homes and we employ over 1,000 staff, so quite a big stakeholder in the East. The three housing associations we've got within the group are Flagship Homes, Victory and Suffolk. We are a developer as well. We buy land and develop homes, and we buy homes from house builders through the planning system. We aim to build about 600 new affordable homes a year. We've got a maintenance arm called RFT and a gas company called Gasway. You might have seen their vans around the region. And we recently launched a charity as well, focusing on homelessness, called Hopestead. So that's who we are. Just a few reflections on COVID, just to follow on from what CJ was saying in terms of the business that we run. So we have seen obviously a slowdown in the construction sites that we work on, but have thankfully bounced back quite positively. COVID inevitably has had a huge impact on our business as it has, across the country. We have seen a decrease in our income. Really reflecting the hardship that that people are facing, and obviously increase in unemployment, increasing claims for universal credit, and that sort of thing that's happening throughout the country is certainly having an impact on us and our business. We've launched an assist initiative providing financial assistance for our customers in hardship, so very much trying to sort of metaphorically wrap our arms around households who might be struggling at the current time. We've provided quite a lot of community support, delivering food boxes, things like that, and a lot of welfare calls to folk who would have been isolating, shielding, perhaps people who live alone and that sort of thing. And we've worked with our local authority partners on housing responses through the pandemic, particularly in respect of rough sleeping and those who perhaps are vulnerable. And we've also tried to support health sectors in various ways, including speedy adaptations to help facilitate hospital discharge, for example. So our overall approach: protect our staff, protect our customers, and protect our business, but also to provide that support role to our partners and to the communities in which we work. Anyway, I'm here to talk about planning, so I'd better jog on. So government, as we know, the golden number, 300,000 homes a year, and at the current time output is about 180,000, so a big step change that's needed in terms of boosting output. And the way that government are approaching this, obviously a number of policy levers will be put into place, but one of the things they're wanting to do is to speed up the plan making process. So that's the process of local plans, and we'll all have examples of where that has been delayed, where it's been railroaded. I think the joint plan for Cambridge City and South Cambs is quite a good example of where that took a number of years to come to fruition through examination. And also a concern that planning applications can be slow, they can be unpredictable, and ultimately, aim to do what we can to speed this up to make the process slicker and to boost output. Alongside that, we've got the policy about boosting home ownership, and Boris talked recently about changing generation rent into generation buy. And we also had the build rhetoric some months ago, didn't we? About building our way out of recession. And of course, we know that the house building industry provides huge economic stimulus and supports job growth. So what is the plan? So there's two consultations. One has just closed and the other closes at the end of the month. So the planning white paper. The idea is that land will be zoned in the future according to whether it's for growth, renewal, or to be protected. And where housing is designated for housing growth, those sites will get automatic outline permission. Again, to speed up the process, there's talk about greater use of digital platforms to aid the plan making process. So we can expect more maps, more visual representation of growth, and certainly less wordy. Design codes, and we talked earlier about this concept of beauty and the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission. I understand that's to support local authorities and develop design codes and ultimately aim to improve quality, environmental standards and the aesthetics of house building. And of course, this massive agenda, which is about carbon reduction and reducing the impact of housing on the environment. Section 106 and community infrastructure levy. So they are, the proposal in the white paper is that these come to an end and are replaced with a single levy in the future. And the infrastructure and affordable housing is funded from this new levy in the future. Changes to the current system. So housing targets, that's something that Saul mentioned. So the idea is that instead of the bottom-up approach to calculating housing requirements that we have at the moment, that switches to a top-down distribution of the 300,000 homes. And I've just pulled out some figures that Litchfield's put out into the public domain, which was about calculating the likely impact of this on our area. So for the central and northeast Anglian area, we can expect our land allocations to increase from about 15,000 homes to about 19,000 homes. So in theory, there's a bigger cake to be shared out, but you will have seen in sector press, that is not the case throughout the whole of the country. And, there's been debates about this levelling up agenda as well. But certainly for our area, a boost in housing output, which would be fantastic. So I'm looking at this, obviously, Flagship, we're a housing association. I'm looking at this through the goggles of a housing association. So there's a proposal in this paper that we temporarily suspend affordable housing on smaller sites. And the suggestion is that that's sites which are 40 to 50 dwellings. So the government are suggesting that this aims to give stimulus to small and medium-sized builders, and they're suggesting that this will take place for 18 months. Will it stay at 18 months, or will it, become a mainstream policy in future? We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, for us at Flagship and for the housing association sector, this is a big concern, because it means that some of our affordable housing will fall out of programme. Particularly concerned about the impact on rural areas. So for us in the east, predominantly rural, this will have a potentially sort of fairly significant impact, and obviously for smaller housing associations as well, and those who are, who build their programme on these smaller sites. The other thing, just which we've put into our consultation response, will this actually have the impact that that government intend? So housing associations, we do front fund the affordable housing on sites, which inevitably helps cash flow. So, could this potentially have the opposite effect? And I've just put a screenshot there from our trade press. So last week, the Local Government Association released some research which was suggesting that had this policy been in place, this would have resulted in 30,000 less affordable homes over the last 5 years. So potentially, this has a significant impact. Extending planning permission in principle, and first homes is the other thing that I wanted to particularly call out today. So first homes are intended to be for sale to local first-time buyers. They'll be offered a discount of at least 30% off the open market value, and that discount will be captured for future sales as well as at first occupation. Properties this should apply to properties with a cap of 250,000 in our area. And what government are suggesting is that 25% of affordable housing that comes from planning gain, so at the current time from Section 106, should be used for this first homes product in the future. So again, through the eyes of a housing association, this is inevitably redirecting an affordable housing resource to folk on higher incomes, and they're talking about first homes being for people earning up to 80,000. Less homes for us to buy from developers, because 25% are going to this use, and it also changes the tenure mix on our sites. Of concern to us is that, if homes are being put to first homes in future, that will result in less affordable or social rent, and might also impact on the demand for shared ownership. So for us, as a large housing association, we need to think about this in terms of the risk, the risk that we are exposed to, and the sites that we buy and develop ourselves, how it might affect our targets, and ultimately to impact on our business plan. So just a few thoughts and implications. So speeding up and simplifying the system, we have to, this is a great thing, that we can speed up the system, that we can approach carbon reduction, drive up design, drive up quality, all of that stuff, is to be welcomed. Section 106, I'd just ask, was it broken? It has delivered. It's not perfect. It really isn't perfect. But this whole scale replacement with a new levy potentially could lead to delay. Can this 300,000 target be reached? So, like I said, for the east of England, moving house building from 15,000 to 19,000 on our patch is great news. History suggests, large scale house building has been where the numbers have been delivered post-war and what have you. And thinking as well about Homes England, so that's the government agency that provides funding for affordable housing. There's 7.5 billion for the next 5 years to fund new affordable housing. And is that enough to be counter-cyclical, especially given that government are suggesting half of that money should be used for shared ownership? And just reflecting on us in the east, so we know the average house price is over £300,000, and that is 11 times average income. So obviously for us as a housing association, we absolutely, want to deliver a balanced housing market, but we also need to make sure that there's homes available for those on the lowest incomes, as well as those who can afford home ownership and perhaps aren't experiencing the same effects of market failure. And just to finish, I guess just to repeat what Richard Bacon said, which was that everyone deserves somewhere to live, and it would be good to be explicit about our support for social housing.
You can argue with that.
So how and when, well, we don't know yet. These are out for consultation. The 4 detailed policy issues presumably can be done at speed, and that's why they've been separated out. The white paper will require primary and secondary legislation and have to work its way through Commons and the Lords and what have you. Thank you.
Joanna, thank you very much. Please, all, I think there's 114 on here at the moment. Please do feel free to put your hand up or comment in the chat if you wish to participate or ask a direct question. Either platform, either works. I'm conscious that I think the plan, Joe, is that the planning white paper, if it makes its way through the Commons and the Laws, doesn't get implemented until 2024. That still seems a long way off. So I guess we carry on as we are for now, perhaps with a new standard methodology for housing need. Is that how you interpret it?
Yeah, I mean, inevitably, local plans take years, don't they? And it seems like as soon as local authority gets to the end of a local plan, so they start on the next one. So yeah, I don't, this isn't going to be something that happens overnight.
Agreed. And the way you spoke, I sensed the thing you were most nervous about, Joe, was the switch from affordable homes not being required on developments of perhaps 40 or 50 units. I know the intention is to stimulate the small, medium-sized enterprises so that they can do more. Do you sense that will have a negative impact?
I think it will certainly have a negative impact on affordable housing in rural areas. Sites that are allocated for growth or otherwise come forward in villages, and on the edge of market towns will inevitably be less, up to 40 and 50 dwellings, and will not therefore require affordable housing. So yeah, I think that's really bad news for rural areas.
Joe, thank you. I mean, that is so it's a bad news for affordable homes. I guess we could question if that's a capital A or a small A. I don't mean to be pedantic about the definition, but I can see we've got Julian Wells on the call, we've got Grant Keys, I can see Andrew Savage in the corner of my screen. There's lots of people with views on housing and the way we get these outputs. I guess the focus here is that we want to do more and do it faster. Do you think either of these consultations will result in that?
I think faster, yes, if land is zoned and has greater certainty, if growth sites get outline permission automatically, that will speed up the system. Greater transparency is absolutely to be welcomed. Will it deliver more? The housing, the housing requirement targets that I put up would suggest yes. For our area, this will result in more housing growth, which we've got a housing crisis, haven't we? We need to be doing everything that we can and using all of these policy levers to make sure that everybody does have access to a safe, decent, affordable home.
Joe, thank you. Yeah, I think we can commend that. A few things in the chat. Julia Stevens has asked if we'll circulate the contact details for everyone on the call. I think subject to data protection, I think we can say the names, but we probably can't give the email addresses. Simon Hughes has asked whether or not we're going to formulate a response to the white paper on behalf of the LEP. That's something I'll pick up after the meeting. It's a good idea, Simon. I haven't been involved in that so far. Mark Goyder's questions about whether or not we're putting too much weight on the needs of the individual rather than the whole community. Mark, would you like to add any more around that? If you can unmute yourself and just emphasise the point you're making.
Thank you very much, Saul. Yes, I mean, in the work we've been doing in this commission that Andy Wood's chairing for the Mayor of Cambridge and Peterborough, when you start thinking about how can you make health and social care work more effectively in the region, you immediately come across the importance of the quality of community life, of the number of people who may turn up in GP surgeries who wouldn't turn up in GP surgeries if communities and new communities were designed in ways where neighborliness was kind of baked in. And I'm really concerned that our debate has barely mentioned the idea of multi-generational housing and the kind of social housing, certainly, but the kind of flexible social housing that makes it easier for longer for people to stay in their own homes with their nearest and dearest, as opposed to moving towards dependence on institutional care. Am I right in thinking this is neglected in the white paper, or is there something there? In which case, can we hear about it?
Joe?
I think that's really interesting. And, you know, if we look at the demographics, particularly of our area, Norfolk and Suffolk, we know that a significant chunk of the population growth will be in the over 65. So I think the challenges of the ageing population is something that's, you know, that applies, you know, wholeheartedly to the area in which we work. And we've all got examples, haven't we, of, you know, of elderly relatives who, you know, who get to an age where they can't live independently in their own home, and the, you know, and the options are very difficult. So I think from us in the housing sector, you know, we aim to provide adaptations, to provide support, different ways that we can support people to remain fit and independent in their own home, and ultimately to you know, to achieve, you know, good quality of life in later living, and to support health and social care outcomes. But inevitably, there comes a time when that's not sustainable, and that, you know, that can't go on forever. And you're right, pathways for, you know, for more intensive forms of health and care and support are absolutely critical. In terms of the white paper, I think you're right. I don't recall seeing a lot of reflection in the white paper about that. Certainly, if we look across Norfolk and Suffolk, there are ambitions to build more extra care, so people, you know, which support independent living. But yeah, I mean, I think as a society, I think it's a really critical issue. It's definitely a critical issue for Norfolk and Suffolk, and I think you're right in calling it out on the white paper.
Joe, thank you. No, thank you, Mark, for the question. A couple of other observations in the chat I'll just capture for you all. Mike Rigby's pointed out that how far this goes, and whether or not this planning for the future paper and the revised methodology makes its way through Parliament in the way it's currently drafted. It depends very much on the parliamentary arithmetic and how strong the opposition is. And of course, backbench rebellion. So a very good point. Robin Neves pointed out that as a flagship development that he's very aware of, 40 dwellings, but social media is full of concerns and opposition. But we do find this, the sort of NIMBYism debate about it's great to do this, but not near where I live. That would be shocking. Jonathan Cage, I think, has just joined now with a point about the process of zoning, going to take years to get through and take many years of challenge. Agreeing with the principles of this is great, but is it going to be enough? Jonathan, your question's longer than I imagined. Jonathan, can you unmute yourself and give me a quick synopsis of that?
Yeah.
Age?
Can you hear me?
I can. Morning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my main concern, we've had a discussion in the chamber about this at national level about is it the right time to do these? I think everybody in the planning industry looks at the white paper and generally thinks it's a good idea, right? It's just whether you should be doing it now. Is it kind of a knee-jerk reaction to something? And with everything else that we are likely to face in the next 12, 18 months, 24 months, which we haven't yet faced as an industry, it's still to come, and I think people are kidding themselves if it isn't. We're already seeing quite a lot of people being let go across the industry, especially young people, apprentices, graduates, because businesses can't keep them going. And although everybody says there's work flying around, there is, but it's hard and there's not a huge amount of it. There's probably only little bubbles in the industry that are really doing well. generally across the industry, I wouldn't say it's doing that well. And what worries me is it's very difficult when you're working in a lockdown situation to provide the support that the young people need, because you're generally working from home. And what they need to be really is working in an office environment with a team structure around them where they learn and they get that sort of benefit, which is why they're being let go first. It's as simple as that. So, because to be honest, if you're looking at saving costs as a business, you don't let your cheap members go, you let some of the more expensive ones go. So I'm worried about that for the future, for the next 2 years. And then on top of it, we're going to hear in a minute that we need loads of jobs for building Sizewell C, which sounds great, but I just fear for house building, you know, the whole area. We're going to lose a bunch of people. We've just spent the last 5 years at secondary school trying to attract into this industry, and they're just going to go get another job in marketing or healthcare or whatever. And they will have a bitter taste in their mouth that they've joined an industry that's dumped them very quickly. And I think that is one of our biggest issues.
Thank you, Jonathan. You've actually taken the subject nicely into the next aspect of our agenda. So if I can thank Joe ever so much for that contribution, it was really useful and appreciated. Jonathan, your question touched upon Sizewell, and that is the next speaker's proposition. Tom McGarry and Guy Hazelhurst from EDF. If I can switch across to you, perhaps you can tell us about this little job not too far away.
Well, thank you, Saul, and I would point out to Jonathan there that and I would just point out to Jonathan that, you know, we are part of obviously the construction sector when we talk about Sizewell C. I've been trying to share my screen. Can I have the opportunity to do that? And can you see it?
Yeah. You
can. And you can see the presentation, yes?
Just gone off again, Tom. It was there a second ago.
Okay, it's opening now. 1 second. There we are. Okay, so I'm joined today, and thank you very much indeed for Saul for giving us the opportunity. I will keep my part of the presentation to under 10 minutes. In fact, I'll start a timer now because my colleague, our workforce development head and lead is Guy Hazelhurst, and he'll take you through some of the work that we're undertaking at the moment in terms of addressing opportunities for young people and upskilling in order to meet our demands for a workforce. I'll very briefly just point out here that many of you would recognise Sizewell B, Sizewell A and Sizewell B, both at the left of the welcome screen there, and an artist's impression there of Sizewell C, 2 reactors. And those generate 3.34 gigawatts of electricity into the grid. Now, not many people may be aware, but 7 of our 8 operating nuclear power stations in the UK will close by 2034. In fact, since 2010, we've had something in the region of around 20% of our electricity generating capacity closed down within the UK. And within the space of 25 years, it will be something in the region of around 55% by the mid-2030s. We have to replace that with low carbon electricity generation. You cannot just go from generating 17% stable base load of zero carbon electricity from nuclear down to 3% and not anticipate that gap will be filled, and not necessarily, as everybody hopes, with renewables. That gap is usually, as we see it's the case in Germany, that as soon as you lose nuclear capacity, it is filled by burning something, in their case coal, in our case probably gas. So what we need to do is to encourage the growth of renewables, but also have that dependent stable baseload of low carbon electricity generation. And the other thing, let's be clear on this as well, here in the East we've got the expertise around running a station like the EPR, because it's a pressurised water reactor, just like Sizewell B, our only pressurised water reactor operating within the UK. Now, just a brief overview. I think it's important to point out, because we're on a building growth group call, I was keen to keep this supply chain focused. So Hinkley Point C tier 1 suppliers will, with EDF, lead the building of Sizewell C, and that's understandable. I mean, none of the tier 1s obviously had their headquarters based in Somerset nor Suffolk, but our aim will be to make sure that East of England suppliers benefit, and more design and manufacturing work is moved into the UK, adding to the national spread of work on Hinkley Point C and raising the percentage of UK content, which is currently at 64%, to 70% by contract value. So I think I really want to stress on this point, there are a lot of detractors who suggest that there will be a simple lift and shift of the entire supply chain from the southwest. It simply is not the case, and of course Guy is on the call today to talk about the putting in place in order to make sure that the opportunities are experienced in the East of England. I would also point out that the LEP has been particularly energetic on this front, working government and also with the Suffolk Chamber of Commerce in terms of developing a local supply chain development team that is based in Feeder Maltings in Ipswich with the Suffolk Chamber. A strong team of 4 now. Indeed, Gareth Davies was on the call earlier, who heads up that team, whose key focus is making sure that local businesses are aware of the of all of the codes and standards required in order to get your best foot forward on the local supply chain. And we want to create the same infrastructure that we did in Somerset, where now contracts with Southwest companies are equal to about £2.2 billion in value. We do need to deliver reductions in construction costs, and again that fuels this idea that there will be a lift and shift, but that's not actually the case. The point is that this is not going, the EPR, the design of station we wish to build, has been of course influenced by the UK regulator. We would not of course have got a design certificate from the Office of Nuclear Regulation if we did not respond to their requirements in terms of changes to design. Therefore, you could describe the EPR, while it derives from an evolution of French and German designs of power station, is now very much the UK EPR due to those changes being proposed. That also means, therefore, that we have, of course, national supply chain, but also it also means that we avoid any further design costs, because we wish to build a replica of Hinkley Point C here on the Suffolk coast. And further to that, we can also make sure as well that the expertise that has been developed by those tier 1s and by ourselves can be obviously shared with the local supply chain. We submitted our application for a development consent order for Sizewell C in May after 8 years of consultation. It was accepted by the Planning Inspectorate in June. We also at that time applied for a nuclear site licence and indeed environmental permits as well. So in fairness, after a long series of presentations to Building Growth over the years and various other local groups, we are now in a very firm kind of timetable for delivery for decisions on Sizewell C. The confirmation of replication of the vast majority of the HPC design has been achieved. We also have detailed integrated work schedule and a network flow diagram showing key interfaces and the critical path to what we call J0 developed. Now, J0 is when we essentially pour the concrete that would be the bed of the first reactor. At Hinkley, reactor 1 is on schedule to come on stream in 2025. So early works on Sizewell, for example, road schemes are ready to go. Up to £300 million worth of work could be awarded during 2021. We also anticipate next month that the government will publish its energy white paper. Now, this will confirm, we hope, the financing model for new nuclear projects in the UK going forward. Many of the UK's nuclear suppliers are involved in Hinkley Point C, those tier ones, have come together in the Sizewell C consortium. And we're working with the Suffolk Chamber of Commerce to bring in as many Suffolk and Norfolk based companies as well. The various moves by government in order to get to that financing model and provide us with clarity will help us in order to confirm a number of contracts going forward as well for works, and indeed, of course, a final investment decision towards the end of next year. As well as obviously generating electricity into the grid, we're exploring with stakeholders across the East, and particularly through the LEP and the All Energy Industry Council, the even greater role that Sizewell C and Sizewell B can play in achieving the UK's net zero ambitions. At the moment, about 60% of the heat generated at Sizewell B goes into the North Sea, which is a bit of a waste, to say the least. What we should be doing is looking to help in various other applications, such as kickstarting the hydrogen economy. So we wish to get a demo electrolyser at Sizewell B, which could be scaled up at Sizewell C once the power plant is operational and the hydrogen market has developed. We would like to also invest in removing carbon from the atmosphere through the development of direct air capture, and also looking towards, of course, a period of time when free ports will be a reality, aligning ourselves with the local free port bids to create a test bed with regulatory flexibility to deliver innovation in low carbon technologies and support the decarbonisations of sectors such as shipping. And naturally, we're talking to colleagues in Felixstowe and at ABP in Lowestoft as well on those concepts. In terms of the Sizewell C project, I would say of all the energy projects proposed for this part of the world, it creates the most jobs, a stable baseload of low carbon electricity generation. Renewables, of course, are intermittent, but at present, I think it's probably not recognised, but while they are still being developed, we have the most comprehensive suite of community focused proposals to mitigate impacts and enhance benefits, and indeed to address a number of the issues that have already been discussed in our call today, in particular around housing. So first and foremost, we want to minimise disruption to local communities during the construction of Sizewell C. Indeed, a number of our infrastructure proposals have been inspired, if you like, more by the amenity impacts and environmental impacts onto local communities than, for example, perhaps the capacity of certain roads to take traffic. So we're proposing link roads and bypasses and so on to divert impacts around noise and air quality and so on, in order to try and make sure that the disruption to local communities is minimised. Guy will come on to talk about investment in local employment, education and skills, but we've already, due to our experience at Hinkley, been able to increase this aim of enabling 1,000 apprenticeships to 1,500. I've already mentioned the work that we're doing with the Chambers of Commerce, but one of the things that I think people may need to be aware of as well, that even though we've had 8 years of consultation, we are continuing to work in response to the relevant representations that have been received through the planning process to date. Now, many of you will see that there are continuing points being raised to us about our proposals in terms of our transport strategy and in terms of environmental mitigation as well. We're undertaking further work in those areas and will probably need to make material changes and move towards the potential a further round of consultation, possibly this year, on material changes. That means that that transport strategy could look very different indeed. I won't reveal too much now, but I would hope to be able to say that where we say we'll transport 40% of the construction materials by rail and sea, that will be at least 40%. We also, on terms of our environmental mitigation piece, we will be providing updates on that. And of course, we have planning obligations to return all of these areas back to standards befitting the AONB following construction. The Sizewell C platform and the link road to it will be the remaining elements, along with bypasses such as the Two Villages bypass on the A12, which will be permanent. Everything else will be returned back to either agricultural use or to a standard befitting the AONB. And that is true of all of those associated development sites, such as the accommodation campus and the caravan site and so on as well. There are a number of different funds that we are proposing as well, again, which I think is quite unique to other energy projects that are proposed for the East Coast. Not least, of course, through the provision of a tourism fund, but also a comprehensive 24/7 on-site occupational health service, which includes visiting GPs, a healthcare contribution and a public services contingency fund. Now, healthcare and well-being regards the local community has come up regularly during this call. We have to submit a full health impact assessment and community impact assessment, which we have as part of our proposals, and propose mitigation and negotiate mitigation for impacts with local communities, with the district and county councils. Something we are fully committed to doing so, and our track record at Hinckley, I think, does speak for itself in terms of the ways that we have invested in public services for the temporary period, of course, of construction, where there will be an increase in transient workers of a significant amount. It's our responsibility to make sure that just as we mitigate environmental impacts, we also mitigate the impact that can be forecast to public services and the community. So I would just like to conclude my section by saying that the particular point we're at now, these dates have somewhat changed because we have gone away and gone back to the drawing board on some elements, which we think will further improve the DCO application. So we anticipate that we may well need to consult on those, and we will be letting all stakeholders and the local community, will make them aware of that well in advance, to give them an opportunity to look at any material changes to the proposals. However, we will hopefully be in a period of examination on the Sizewell C proposals that will be undertaken by the examining panel from the Planning Inspectorate, and we anticipate that will start in January of next year. That will run for a period of 6 months. They then go away and write up their recommendation for a decision and submit it to the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. That is a period of 3 months, and then it takes us then to the Secretary of State's window for announcing the decision, which again is a further 3 months. Now, we would anticipate that that would take us, because of course these are maximum periods, we will anticipate a decision by the end of 2021. And of course, with the energy white paper also being published next month, and our engagement with investors having continued now for over many years, we hope we will be in a position for a final investment decision as well at that point. I'm going to hand over to Guy now, who will be able to address some of the points in particular raised by Jonathan, and perhaps a degree of concern and scepticism, but hopefully we'll be able to support the construction sector in terms of the investments and initiatives we will undertake should Sizewell C get consent. Over to you, Guy.
Thanks,
I'll
Tom.
drive.
Thanks. Well, hello, everybody.
Just while we switch, Guy, sorry to interrupt. Can I just a couple of points in case we lose them? Nigel Cornwall just wants to share his pleasure at hearing about the EDF net zero concept, actively promoting net zero at Leyston's applauded, and also the demo electrolyser. Nigel, you probably know, is a big supporter of Hydrogen East and an energy expert in the region, so some applause for that. On the other side of the equation, we've had lots about coastal erosion, climate change. Is Sizewell the right location? I imagine that after 8 years of consultation, Tom, we're kind of through that now, aren't we?
So obviously, regards coastal erosion, my point would be that we have a vested interest in not investing £20 billion into the sea. Now, that's the first obvious point. The second point is also that we have also obviously invested in, you know, the expertise and qualifications that are necessary in order to inform a infrastructure project of this scale in terms of its environmental statement. That many millions have already been invested in terms of not just making the case, but understanding the case. And if we had come across any risk at all that this part of what I know to be a having, you know, being a local, I understand that the Suffolk coast is an eroding coast in certain parts, and there are also parts of it that are very stable indeed. And the case in terms of Sizewell is that it is a stable part of the coastline for a number of geological, coastal morphological reasons. And if anybody, and I'm sure that, and I know that in draft representations that has been challenged, if the charge gets as far as examination, then the examining panel will have to determine whether our evidence is robust enough to satisfy their decision. I can assure you, I believe it will be. You know, I think, again, we've had 2 nuclear power stations operating on this part of the coast for nearly for over 50 years, and we will be in a position now, I think, where we can look forward to the 3rd being operational as well. And we are taking our responsibilities, in particular in terms of coastal processes, very seriously indeed. It is the right site because government undertook a strategic siting assessment and already considered all of these issues around 15 years ago. Yeah, that's my answer on that front. I think there's some other points have been raised about infrastructure projects and the link to them in terms of long-term economic growth. So I think a lot of people will probably be looking about the A12. Now, you always knew that something was coming up about Sizewell C because the front page of the East Anglian Daily Times would have something to say about the 4 Villages bypass. Now, I would stress that we're trying to build a nuclear power station, which is going to be very important in order to replace electricity generating capacity for the UK with a low carbon dependable source of baseload electricity. So that's the first point I would make. Okay, so it is good for economic growth in terms of that, you know, we're generating electricity. And I also would say that creating something that creates skills, because you know, Guy will come on and explain what we're doing around the skills in the workforce, is intrinsically good to local young people in particular, and also to our future capacity for economic growth. So skills in terms of people, electricity generation. And we were actually involved in delegations with the County Council and the District Council that visited the Department for Transport on several occasions in order to try and deliver what was called the Suffolk Energy Gateway, i.e. that 4 Villages bypass, the dualling or the bypassing of those villages of Milesford, Little Glenham, Stratford, St Andrew and Farnham. The aim, of course, was to improve that link between Lowestoft and Ipswich. Unfortunately, the DFT did not support it, even though we were a willing partner in providing a financial contribution towards that. Having said that, though, I think as well as providing the economic, or rather the element, if you like, in terms of avoiding disruption to some local communities from these bypasses, I also think that there would certainly, with the 2 Villages bypass, be an infrastructure improvement there. We also want to work with local ports as well to look at far more deliveries by sea and storage around them, and of course also investing in our local supply chain as well. That's another element that will help in terms of further economic growth. So yes, the legacy has been considered, and also in terms of rail as well. We are looking at the potential for certain upgrades to parts of the East Suffolk line, not least potentially also in continuous welded rail, which will mitigate noise impacts from freight trains.
Tom, thank you. I know we've interrupted your presentation with Guy midway through. I know Guy's presentation is going to focus a bit more on employment and skills. I think it's just one more question on the chat from Mark Goyder regarding the long-term responsibility for delivering on the commitments for Sizewell C. And it's a polite question which notes that currently it's shared between EDF and CGN, China General. And just a question as to whether you think that ownership is going to stay the same.
No, I don't, because I can't forecast definitely at this particular stage what it will be, only that EDF, or rather Sizewell C Co, have submitted the application and is the company that is taking this forward and is seeking investors on the basis of that, of the outcome of the white paper. Our director of economic development and regulation has answered Mark's question direct to him before on this. We would hope that first of all, we've got no control over whether CGN will invest in Sizewell C. Their current 20% stake takes them up to the end of this planning process. Okay, I think Chinese investment in UK infrastructure is inevitably going to be a decision of central government, perhaps going forward, given relations at present. We will have to wait and see what that is. If not, and if they're free to do so, it's going to be entirely up to them whether or not they choose to invest in Sizewell C going forward. However, our investment model that we anticipate means that we will see mainly British pension funds. So Sizewell C, Sizewell C Co will be effectively a British company. However, the key concern then that I think what Mark is alluding to is actually about who's going to operate this station. EDF operates all the UK's operating stations, and it does so with a license from the Office of Nuclear Regulation. And let me absolutely assure everybody that that regulated model, there is no way the UK's regulator would let an untried and unpracticed company operate a nuclear power station in the UK. It's probably likely that that operator won't look too different to the one at Sizewell B.
Thank you. Tom, that's great. Can we switch across to Guy now? Some of the questions in the chat have been about employment, apprenticeships, how many, how long, but I think, Guy, you're the best person possible to answer that.
I'll give it a go. So, hello everybody, and thanks for coming along to the presentation. I was first introduced to building growth by Dale Ansell probably about 3 years ago when I first saw your building growth skills strategy, which in it, by the way, has, I guess, still to be enabled a nuclear forum, which I'm very happy to perhaps pick up in this call, i.e. what's the impact of Sizewell C on skills in the region, which I think we're going to pick up now. I think ever since that date, for me, it's all been about how can we integrate Sizewell C with the construction and engineering sector in the East and build and leave something in terms of both supply chain and workforce, which is bigger and stronger than when we left it. I have a background from starting back from the Commonwealth Games in skills and most recently the Olympics and then Hinckley. And on all those projects, what we've tried and attempted to do is generate a legacy through skills. And as I say, use projects like this as a lever for economic growth, but also skills and workforce growth. So completely aligned, I hope, with the building growth strategy, which is actually a very impressive document. I've got and we have 4 strategic pillars really for workforce and skills at Sizewell C. And the first 2 bullets on here, I think, are really important. And the reason that we've put creating local economic benefit and social mobility first is actually employing locally on your project makes complete sense. It gives you an ability to reduce churn, and this addresses the second bullet, and keep people in the workforce with the right behaviours, the right quality, maximise productivity. So having a local workforce is exactly the right thing to do and to strive for. But in doing that, and obviously rural Leiston, Ipswich and Lowestoft are areas of low social mobility, it's a great opportunity for us to actually address, particularly now post-COVID, some key government and regional policy priorities. We're not looking at Sizewell C in isolation. I think the opportunities for demobilisation of things like offshore wind, particularly in the areas of electricals and the generation side, into Sizewell to create sustainable energy jobs, is something that we very much want to do. This isn't just all about what Sizewell needs. And indeed, in terms of leaving a legacy, I think Paul Warmington, who's on this call as part of the Suffolk Delivery Board and Norfolk County Council, saw the sense to commission the PITE 8 study, which I think is a fantastic piece of work, which basically then says, well, these are the skills that and the foundation skills that the region needs. These are the skills that Sizewell C needs. So and I'll come on to investment in skills in a minute. If we're going to invest in skills, let's invest in the skills that are the legacy skills, not just for Sizewell C, but for the region as a whole. And that piece of work, which I'd like to see repeated and revisited over the next, and perhaps we can support in that over the next 10 years or so, would be, I think, critical in making sure that when we invest in skills for Sizewell, we're actually investing in sustainable skills for the region. Minimising workforce and project risk is something where workforce really plays a key role. So often the role of workforce in productivity, for example, gets missed. Without the right workforce delivering your project, you put yourself at incredible risk. And I only have to point over the channel to a sister project of ours in Flomenville, which you probably know is overrun and delayed. But if you look at the root causes of that, so many of them are down to the root skills and capabilities of the workforce themselves. We're in a situation in this country where we need to replace 38,000 welders just to replace the ones who are leaving in the next 4 years, let alone those that will be required to fuel, if you like, the fabrication side of the infrastructure renaissance in this country. So 38,000 welders is the minimum that we need. We've got Brexit coming. The grow your own concept around skills in the UK is really stark, and there is a really need to do so. And of course, that then links to the first bullet, which is if we're going to experience workforce risks in these areas about capability and capacity, then let's grow those capabilities and capacities and skills in the local economy and put them there to benefit local people. So, I don't separate what we're doing in terms of a force for good for the region from, the issues that we have as an industry in addressing the UK skills issues that we have. The third and fourth bullets on here are really about how we leverage our investment that we will make as part of our DCO as a project with those of others to make a force for good. And I'm looking at things like the offshore sector deal, the nuclear sector deal. At Hinckley, where I still lead on workforce development, we invested initially in DCO in 2011, £13.5 million directly in skills. That's for things like civils, skills centres, and most recently, which is an additional investment in a welding centre of excellence for MEH. In each one of those cases, because we've invested, it's provided incredible leverage from other areas to invest also in skills related. That original 13.5 at Hinckley is now measured at 40 million that's been matched and come in to match that investment, not just from government, DFE, IoTs, but industry charities, industry training boards, and other people who invest in skills. But if we hadn't have put that 13.5 million in, or if Hinckley wasn't investing in those skills, that additional 40 million arguably wouldn't have benefited the Southwest. So we're at 53 million investment in skills relating to Hinckley at the moment in the Southwest. I'd very much hope to see a similar leverage effect in the East. And one of the things that the final bullet on here, which is really about, how can we learn from the series effects of having done Hinckley? So in Hinckley, for example, we've learned an awful lot about how we can benefit the local economy, how we can work with education, the role of colleges in our development. And Saul will know, because we've had a few meetings now between principals of colleges in the East and universities, and also Bridgewater and Taunton College in the West, to see how we can get this knowledge transfer going, because we're not starting from a clean sheet in Sizewell. We really hope that the East can pick up immediately from Hinckley's successes and transfer of learning and knowledge, so that actually we get a bit of a kickstart into skills and employment at Sizewell that we didn't have at Hinckley, and making the most of that series effect. The other thing that's come up in various conversations in the East is how we can actually increase the level of entry to people into Sizewell. And one of the ways that we can do that is to give people, particularly young people, experience at Hinckley. So, and then they come back to Sizewell, let's hope, as not just operatives or tradespeople or professionals, but maybe as supervisors or managers, which was always a stated wish and aim, if you like, that we had from the region right from the off. So it's taken a while to get going, but we've used the mechanical and electrical mobilisation at Hinckley as an opportunity to do that, and of course it links with the East broader interest in energy. And only last week we interviewed 12 students at East Coast College for apprenticeships at Hinckley, 8 of whom will start at Hinckley within 6 to 8 weeks' time, which we're incredibly pleased with. And that's the start. That's the start of the pilot, if you like, of opening up apprenticeship opportunities at Hinckley and higher level apprenticeship opportunities at Hinckley that could come back to Sizewell. So that's where we are in terms of our strategy. For those in building, that this will be no surprise, but it's a relatively simple slide that just shows really from the day we start what the workforce actually looks like and the kinds of skills that we will be drawing on. And because we are a power station, and because we basically need to build the building that the machine then goes into, we're both a civils project, but we're also one of the largest process plant and mechanical projects that Europe, or indeed the world, has seen. So that means that the workforce essentially swaps out at some point towards the middle to the end of the project, from one that is very heavily plant, civils, logistics, construction oriented, to one that about 5 years in really starts to shift to one that is all about mechanical, electrical, heating, ventilation, 4 million meters of cabling, for example, 2,800 meters of pipe, 40,000 welds just on one reactor, so that's 80,000 welds across the 2 reactors. So we're actually looking at these 2 very different workforces, and then there's a workforce that operates it at the end, and of course a workforce that supports that workforce in terms of logistics, security, driving, obviously the things that keep the workforce going around catering and all those other roles, which are about 1,200 roles, which support the ones that you can see on this chart. I think it's really important when we look at some of these roles to think that if we have issues of, let's take one like lifting, which is in big words there on the second row. If you can't get a lifting operative in Ipswich in 3 years' time, that will be our problem, as well as those of the local economy, because nobody wants to pay more for lifting operatives than they have to, or experience delay in their lifting operations, or all of those things. So I think one of the things we have to do is look at where demand for all of these skills is high in the region, and then use our power to invest in skills, in those skills that everybody needs, the Morgan Sindals, the Carters and others, to make sure that actually we're contributing to the skills pool that everybody needs, not just the one that we need. So it's not all about what Sizewell needs, as I said before. I'd just like to go on to the last stage, because last slide that I have, And I'm not going to go through this in exhaustive detail, but I'll pick out some of the key commitments and our responses to them, which relate to the things that Tom was saying. And please do, read this slide, at your leisure in more detail. But some of the commitments or pledges that we have, that Tom mentioned, obviously translate into commitments. So I just wanted to pick out a few. One is our commitment to skills within the region more generally, and NALEP and LEP, and integrating not just with the building growth sector skills strategy, but the other 10 sector skills strategies and other employers and key actors in the region to create this force for good for skills. And I'm very pleased and proud to be a member of the SAP now for about 3 years, and to be leading on the breaking down barriers for growth objective within the NALEP SAP. I think that's exactly where we as a project need to be to create this future legacy of sustainable skills in the region, and we take that very, very seriously. We will be and are just launching ways of engaging young people with the project, and we've just launched Young Sizewell C. Now, Young HPC, which we run very successfully in the West, is a way of capturing people through an inspirational sort of series of activities in schools, and how we actually funnel them and pipeline them into apprenticeships at Hinckley. I think in the East, we're looking much broader than that. We don't have roles and jobs yet at Sizewell C, but we do have, a post-COVID situation where young people need to be signposted to opportunities, understand where they fit, understand how some of their barriers to employment may be overcome. So one of the key things we're doing with Young Sizewell C is working with Icon Beer, DWP, other LEP groups such as Enabling Young People for Success, to signpost young people in the region to their best opportunity, if you like, for being successful in gaining work and opportunity. So we launched that in the EADT, I think about 6 weeks ago. It will come into life as a system at the beginning of November, and then serve the project from that point on. Another thing that we've done is, and this comes to the investment in skills, I think building growth has a real role to play here, is that we'll create a skills fund that will be used to invest in colleges and in training in the region. And I think it's really important that skills fund addresses the issues, let's say within the PI8 report, and the roles within the PI8 report, not just the ones that we need. So if we're investing in the skills infrastructure for the region with the fund, then the governance around it needs to be such that there's an agreement that those investments will benefit the region first, and not just EDF. We will add to that fund in terms of our own investment for the skills the project needs around things like testing, assessment, upskilling of the existing workforce. They will not be paid for from the fund. This fund exists to benefit the region and to benefit regional skills and investments in local colleges. So how we manage that going forward is still somewhat up for grabs, particularly the governance model, but there'll be a skills fund to invest in enhancement of provision in the region. I think that's really important when we're talking about the needs of infrastructure vis-a-vis perhaps some of the more traditional courses and curriculum that are being offered in colleges at the moment. Something we think is really important, and we're launching next week, and we've got meetings with the Chamber and members of sort of the LEP, is how we get a local supply chain skills program going. Tom mentioned the 2 billion of contracts that have been awarded so far to local people or contracts to local companies in Somerset. Well, one of the best ways of creating local employment on your project is to get local businesses winning work on your project. So there's obviously a parallel strand of activity led by Stephen Carroll in the Sizewell C team with the Chamber, and with Gareth Davis of the Chamber to try and make that happen. But I think the point here is, how much do the skills of those businesses contribute to their success in winning work? And once they've won work, how can we work with them to use skills in their mobilisation, in their employment of new staff? So a bit of a first for Sizewell, which we didn't do at Hinckley, is how can we put a local supply chain skills program together that supports local businesses before they win work, in effectively improving their businesses through skills, but then works with them once they've won work to maximise their local recruitment, to maximise their engagement with skills. So that's something that's really important launching next week. The HPC conveyor, I've already mentioned. That's where we are very keen for as many people who want or can, particularly in this post-COVID era, to experience work at Hinckley, become part of that project and come back to Sizewell with those skills enhancements that they've had, and hopefully career progression that they've experienced, particularly if they went on to Hinckley as an apprentice. We're going to roll that out now to the broader MEH JV. We're going to widen that out to other colleges, because East Coast College was really the pilot for that, but of course we've got Suffolk New, we've got West Suffolk College, we've got Norfolk, who could all engage in this sort of activity. So that's the next steps for that. A Sizewell C job service is something that I'd very much like to develop with building growth in mind. This is where we create a talent pool for our project of people who who express a wish to work on the project. Now that does two things. One is it means that they're on our system so we can push jobs and opportunities to them. But it also means that if they're on our system, we can direct them in the direction of pre-employment and skills opportunities, perhaps to get them to the point where they can experience a job on Sizewell before they actually get the vacancy notifications. It's a way of actually developing a talent pool and then pushing opportunities and jobs to them. I'd very much like to open that job service up to vacancies that are non-Sizewell vacancies, building growth companies vacancies and apprenticeships. And we're talking with Paul Warmington, who's on the call at the moment on this presentation, about how we might expand what the Hinckley Job Service does very successfully, but to become a job service for the greater good that can serve the region and serve particularly sort of building growth members, if we can, so that those apprenticeships, those roles that you have, can be advertised and posted on that Sizewell C, and let's not necessarily brand it Sizewell C Job Service, on the job service. So that's that one. A couple more just to make you aware of. On the social mobility front, and again using some lessons from Hinckley, we're very aware, particularly in rural areas, just about how difficult it can be for individuals to actually hold down and complete courses for all sorts of reasons around social mobility, but one of them obviously being travel and commuting to places to train, which I think if you are in Leiston, you're in the second or even first area in the country in terms of the longest commute to train. I think it's something you share actually with Minehead in Somerset. It takes about a couple of hours to get there. So creating a bursary scheme that puts money into the families and the individuals who are doing courses is something we're very keen to do. I noticed that I've just been probably called for time by Tom. So the only other thing that was on there was our apprenticeship commitment, the 1,500, which we are confident we can make with our supply chain based upon the experiences that we've had at Hinckley, but also one of the things that we are just doing at the moment is trying how we can transfer our levy, that's EDF's levy pot, into local businesses. So last week we transferred levy, or agreed to transfer levy, into 12 local businesses around Leiston, 3 of them in construction, actually 10 of them in healthcare and 1 of them into a school, so that we can actually start to generate apprenticeships using our levy and supporting local businesses to create those apprenticeships. And that's on top of the 1,500 commitments that we've already got. And my final piece was just our support for skills coordination in the region, which at the moment, again, I mentioned Paul a couple of times, he's on this call. I don't think we could achieve what we want to achieve in terms of a broader legacy for skills in the region without somebody or something at the centre of it coordinating skills investments to the greater good that might link then energy with the broader energy offshore, with Sizewell with the other employers in the region, and then maybe even Bradwell. So I think supporting a skills coordination role for us particularly in our DCO, it's something that we're absolutely committed to. So that's it. I just wanted to bring it up to speed on where we were and on our commitment to the region in terms of skills, and very much look forward to working with you all in the future. I think this is the start of something, definitely not the end.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you too, Tom. It's really useful. You name checked many of the colleges that were involved and supporting you, and you supporting them. I think Nikos at West Suffolk, Corrie Peasgood has been a huge supporter of building growth at City College Norwich, Stuart Rimmer at East Coast, Julia Stevens. Many are very grateful for the time you've taken to engage with them to get this right. So thank you for doing that. Specifics, is it still 25,000 jobs throughout the whole construction programme throughout the 10 years?
So we've uplifted that. There's 40,000 roles based on the lessons from Hinckley, and I think we need to be careful when we describe a role as opposed to a job, because one of the key things we're very keen to do is to give as many roles to one individual as we can. It's one of the ways you keep somebody on the project, and managing through that those different occupations I showed you is to actually allow somebody to progress. So it's 40,000 roles, and those may be a number of employment opportunities for single individuals as we rebroker them through the project.
That's right. Okay, understood. And peak workforce, I recall that being 5,600 at some point. Is that still about that or not?
No, that's that again based on Hinckley and the DCO. We've gone with 7,009, so there's an uplift in during DCO to a peak of 7,009, because effectively that's where we think Hinckley is going to get to, and we've been talking to the authorities in the West about that, just to join it all up. So both projects will now have peaks of around, well, let's say 7,900, but 8,000.
7,900 on site, Saul. Yeah, okay, 600 in the associated developments.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I think the your observation to pick up there was, I think Jonathan Cage made an observation earlier about the impact on construction as a norm if many of the workforce rush to Sizewell C to be engaged as part of this large workforce. That's fantastic, but the net deficit locally, we must work hard to avoid.
Well, you've heard from Guy there that's the strategy. This isn't a repeat of Sizewell B. This is a learning from Sizewell B, from Hinkley Point C as well. It's looking at the economy in the round rather than just building a strategy to serve Sizewell C alone.
Understood. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Guy. Really useful. Wish you every success. We've got two more speakers, so sorry if we're a little bit behind programme. It's terrible chairing, but please do stay with us. Lynn Clabham's next. Lynn leads the Cambridge Norwich Tech Corridor, and we've heard that mentioned many times today. So whilst Tom stops sharing, perhaps I can switch to Lynn, and Lynn can come off mute. We've mentioned Oxford-Cambridge Arcs. We've mentioned Cam Cox. I think Richard extended it to Bristol. Lynn, perhaps you can bring us back to Cambridge Norwich Tech Corridor and update on where we are there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are a lot of corridors, aren't there? We're just discussing that this morning. I'm going to try to keep it fairly brief. I know that a lot of people have other things to pop off to, but I'm just going to share a quick presentation. And essentially, like Sol was saying, I hope you can all see my presentation. I just clicked off the screen. Can you see that? Or here we go. That should be the correct one. Yeah, there we are. So, I know many of you who are on this call are probably quite familiar with the Tech Corridor initiative. However, I thought just quickly for those of you who aren't, I will just go through a little bit about what the Tech Corridor initiative is, what we do, and in particular what we do in relation to spatial growth. I mean, it's been quite a crazy year, so it could be helpful with a little bit of a reminder. But in essence, the Tech Corridor is a public-private partnership set up to support investment and inclusive economic growth across the region. We're funded by the public sector, so that's the left, the 3 counties and the local authorities. But we do have a delivery board, which is made up of both public and private sector representatives and education representatives who help us develop the strategy and our deliverables and activities. But I would say a majority of our work alongside, the core team of public sector partners, is with businesses, in particular, various tech businesses, as well as the education organisations. So as CJ kind of set the scene for me really nicely early on, what we do, all the work that we do, is very closely aligned both with the two local industrial strategies and the wider sort of economic strategies for the region. So let's see if we can see it here. Okay. So our vision for the Tech Corridor is to be an international recognised region as a top-tier destination for technology firms looking to establish, grow, cluster, for highly skilled workers looking for rewarding careers and strong purpose and a rich quality of life, and for businesses and investors seeking the next high-value opportunity. So really the vision is all about building on our existing and emerging knowledge economy, but also recognising that people and communities are really core to both the success of the Tech Corridor, but also the success of the wider economy. So why here? Well, the Tech Corridor as a concept was really born on the back of the dualling of the A11 and the opportunities for accelerating economic growth on the back of this investment. And that was, quite a lot of that came from both the public sector and the private sector. And from the very beginning with the Tech Corridor, what we identified as the real opportunity to fuel economic growth and increase average salaries, increase social mobility, would lie in building on our existing strengths in the knowledge economy around science and technology. So I've got some big numbers on there, but just to pick up a few to show you the sort of foundation that we have to build on. We have over 277,000 degree holding graduates, more than 55,000 knowledge intensive jobs. And I think this is quite interesting that we've seen a 40% increase in R&D employment since 2010, which can be compared to a UK average of about 14% over the same period. And at the same time, I think we're home, I think Richard Bacon touched on this really early in this session as well, that we're home to some of the most exciting and cutting edge technology and research that's already changing and improving people's lives across the world in everything from health and food and well-being through to how we power our homes, but also our kind of mobility and travel. But in addition to this sort of research and technology, we also have the solid foundation of the businesses that make it happen. So we have one of the most productive engineering and manufacturing sectors in the country, for example. So what's kind of the issue then? Well, as I'm sure everyone who is on this call appreciates, there is a lot of growth and prosperity, but it's quite concentrated in a small number of locations and clusters. Whilst other parts of this corridor area that we're looking at have, lower than average salaries, issues around social mobility. But at the same time, some of the most successful locations within the corridor are experiencing challenges around the cost of living, the cost of growing their businesses and the commercial space available for them to grow their businesses. And we also recognise that there is generally a lack of recognition of the role that the whole of the corridor plays in the UK economy. And although you got Cambridge and Norwich as quite well recognised brands, there are still quite a lot of misconceptions about what the rest of the region is all about and what we actually do for the economy. So what we try to do as a partnership is to address these challenges and to support the region to really kind of try to reach its full potential, is to kind of simplify, kind of dividing it into three very closely interlinked work streams. So the first one is about infrastructure, and that's about creating places for businesses to grow, but also importantly for the communities and the people who will be working in those businesses. So create the kind of right type of communities for both people and business to thrive. The second thing is around assets and clusters, and this might sound a little bit vague, but what it's all about is connecting the people and the businesses to share that prosperity and growth by sharing the knowledge and the expertise and learnings from the different locations across the corridor. And then the last piece is around the kind of promotion and the marketing, and this is really about, you know, telling our story, getting our messages out, our priorities out, both to stakeholders within the region, but also outside of the region. So you mentioned Camcox Arc, or Cambridge, Milton Keynes, Oxford Arc, and you know, that's a really strong message, that's a really strong brand, getting a lot of attention. But you know, for us, it's about communicating what our offer is to the government, and what we might need in terms of support from government in order to grow our knowledge economy. But it's also communicating to businesses and investors about the opportunities to locate here, to grow your business here. And last, and I think again, the guys from Sizewell just kind of summed that up quite nicely, it's around also the talent attraction, the talent retention. So to get those messages about what the opportunities are in the region to live a fulfilling life and have an interesting career. So I think, as you can gather, this is quite a big task, and we're a fairly small team, a core team behind the Tech Corridor. So a lot of the work that we do is in collaboration with the partnership, but also with a lot of different public and private sector colleagues. So, for example, you know, CJ mentioned some of the things that we have been doing as a LEP, and our role as the Tech Corridor is really providing the evidence that help the LEP to strengthen some of their bids that go to government. But we also work really closely with people like the inward investment teams across the region to help them build propositions. So that could be a value proposition around a particular sector or a particular location. And then we run various programs that we are really kind of hands-on delivering. So as an example, last year we ran a program called the Investment Catalyst. It was all about introducing early stage companies with high growth potential to private sector investors so that they could get the funding they needed to scale up their businesses. And that generated just over £1 million of investment. And another example of that is a program we're running together with the LEP again, called Funding Fit, where we help businesses identify grant opportunities, in particular sort of national grants to Innovate UK. And then we help them build the consortia to put a bid together. So, for example, we will bring businesses from Suffolk together with Norfolk businesses, together with the University of Cambridge to build a really, really strong bid. So those are kind of fairly hands-on things, but then we also play a role in the sort of sharing of knowledge and insights, in particular across the kind of traditional county and district borders, to identify opportunities for public sector partners to collaborate on various projects. Like I said earlier, we help to develop evidence to bring forward bids and asks for investment. We use our knowledge and the evidence base that we're building to help influence local investment decisions. So, you know, where to invest into improved power supply, depending on the type of companies we see growing around there, help provide the evidence that can feed into local plans. And then we work with specific locations, like I was saying earlier, but also supporting bids for specific locations. So, for example, we've been quite heavily involved with the town fund deal for Norwich. And then we're also part of bigger lobbying activities, so things like the Ely Junction, which we do together with our partners at the LEP. So at the moment, we're roughly about 2 years. Sorry, I just had a little bit of stuff falling in my home office. We're roughly 2 years as a Tech Corridor partnership and a team and a board. We've been able to deliver impact across all of our work stream, and I think in the last 6 months, even though it's been a very strange 6 months, we've been able to accelerate a lot of the work we're doing, which is incredibly rewarding. And specifically in relation to the sort of spatial growth that I know this group is particularly interested in, we did a big piece of work with Perkins and Will earlier in the year, and many of you, and Sol as well, were really key to supporting us in this work. And what this was, and what you will see up there on the screen at the moment, was trying to create a bit of a baseline of the tech corridor. So in this work, we identified key assets and high growth opportunities within the corridor area to help us focus future work. So these locations were sort of selected based on data around where there are existing assets, such as universities, incubator hubs, those sort of things, as well as scope for further development, and importantly to us as well, different types of sustainable transport modes, so that you can try to create the sort of communities where people can live and work or travel to work. And this really helped us as well identify kind of key features that define what a successful tech corridor means, and what we would need to look into and put in place to make the tech corridor a joined up ecosystem, while still retaining and enhancing the identities of the individual locations within the corridor. Because to us, that's a really important part of this whole thing. Like, the tech corridor is not just one homogeneous economy. It has very kind of distinct features in different locations, and they're very distinct communities with different challenges and opportunities. And it's about building on those opportunities while still keeping that sort of bigger narrative around science, technology, and sustainability. So this piece of work that many of you helped us with has provided a really strong evidence base for us to understand where we need to go next. And we've also been already able to just use it to help bring forward some investments and projects across the corridor. I think many of you have probably already seen this report. We've shared it in many different locations, but if you haven't, I will share it with Sol at the end of this meeting, and perhaps you can kind of circulate it to people afterwards. So what's next then for the tech corridor in terms of spatial growth? Well, as I just alluded to, one of the key strengths of the tech corridor is that we have that kind of diversity of strengths and opportunities, and that they really can complement each other. So you could go from very sort of early stage cutting edge research, be it into genome editing of crops, but then you can take that all the way through to actually deploying it into one of our fields. Or you could come up with a super clever AI-enabled self-driving cars and actually have those cars manufactured in the region. And I think there is also the diversity in terms of communities. You got everything from a sort of countryside living through to city life. And for us, that really offers an opportunity to think of our tech corridor and our wider region, as in Norfolk and Suffolk and all the way down into Cambridgeshire, as sort of a corridor for life. You know, you've got all the different elements there. That means that you could kind of live your life and do different jobs and have rewarding careers within a fairly small geography. So at the moment, we're actually embarking on the next stage of work around really understanding in more detail what our corridor means and what it is. And so what we're doing, and this work again will be led by Perkins and Will, is that we're going into more detail around these high growth locations that you're currently seeing on the map there, and to really better understand how they work in isolation. Who's there, what are the kind of key anchors, what are key drivers, what are key kind of challenges and bottlenecks, but also understanding how each of these locations are currently interacting with other locations and how they could potentially interact in the future to better kind of benefit each other. So for example, we have excellent locations for startup and incubation activities that could really benefit from being closer linked with the locations that can offer space for businesses to grow and scale. So what is the kind of things we want to achieve and we want to get out of this work? Well, first of all, we want to understand what we can do in terms of unlocking some of the locations, in particular around kind of investment into infrastructure and into communities, and where there are opportunities to bundle those kind of investments across different locations. So there might be, in particular, across different county and district borders. We want to understand what we can do to make some of those locations more attractive. So we work really, really closely with a number of different sector groups and networking groups like Building Growth, but also like NAME and like Tech East. So what can we do in some of those locations to bring in that kind of wider support mechanism to make those more attractive for businesses to move to and to build communities within? And we also want to understand how we can promote and support various locations to build their brand and promote themselves within the kind of bigger picture of the tech corridor. So, for example, places like Haverhill, where you have some really exciting developments around the epicenter, what is their kind of place within the bigger tech corridor story, and how can we support them? And we did a similar piece on this earlier in the summer for Lotus, where they wanted to kind of share with their new owners, Geely, how Lotus at Hethel was linked to a much bigger community around EV and automotive activity. So we kind of helped put together a piece for them that kind of placed Lotus in the middle of this super active network of really exciting and interesting companies. And then the last piece of this puzzle, and what we're trying to tease out of this work, is to identify some of those key projects that are essential to continuing to build our knowledge economy, and to bring that hopefully in the new year to government. So there are projects that some of you are aware of, so coming out of the UEA, for example, around SETI, so that's the Smart Emerging Technology Institute. So to kind of just show all the opportunities around kind of enhancing and building our knowledge economy. And obviously there's a big part of this is sharing this wider picture with our local authority partners to help support them when they start thinking about refreshing local plans and making investment decisions into different locations. So I think the key thing is that we are, as Tech Corridor and as a partnership, we're not necessarily landowners and developers. So this delivery isn't just on us. We think that everyone, both private sector and public sector and the education sector, has a role to play in bringing this region forward. So I have kind of, I'm going to wrap up now, but I do have a little bit of an ask from you all. And we are just, as I said, embarking on this second piece of work. We have a survey that will go out in the next couple of days, where we are trying to gather that information around the different locations. So we would really value your input into this survey to help us create a really rich picture of what's going on across the corridor, what you know is happening, what you see as the main opportunities. And this will cover everything from the kind of business locations, but also, and as a result of COVID, we'll also go into that community aspect that CJ spoke about earlier, that we feel that's becoming more a core part of what we need to focus our efforts on, is building resilient, sustainable communities. So that will be picked up in this piece of work. And I would also ask anyone who's interested in being more involved in how we develop this to get in touch with me, and just kind of put yourself forward as joining us in developing this, because we've got a real opportunity to get this right. And I think the more people we can get involved in supporting it, the more likely we are to get it right. And equally, we do need everyone to kind of help in and pull in. So if you have any thoughts around the key priorities that we should try to push, be it to our local authority, be it to government, be it to someone else, you know, do come forward with that and do get in touch, because you know, the more information, the more kind of community we have behind us, the more I think we can achieve. So that's really it from me. And yeah, any questions? But I will share both this presentation and the report from Perkins and Will with Sol to circulate afterwards.
Lynn, thank you, and really happy to assist you in this collaboration. I think everybody who's still on the line has got Claire's details or mine, so please get in touch with me or vice versa, and we can be a catalyst for you getting your second piece of work out there, Lynn, and joining up with the participants on this call. I have to confess a slight conflict of interest in that I've got 3 projects on the Cambridge-Norwich Tech Corridor that you've helped me with. And I'm completely committed to understanding and realising the benefit of these clusters and complementary growth and making that happen. It makes lots of sense. There's also a note on here from Mike Rigby, I know is one of your fellow ambassadors, want to catch up soon, and lots more on there too. So
absolutely. It's been a crazy few months, but yeah, we have, I would say we have a little bit of catching up on as we were sort of deployed into various things for a few months, but we're full steam ahead. So yeah, anyone who wants to catch up on this, that's great. Thank you, Sol.
Thank you, Lynn. Without further ado, it takes us to our final speaker. If we thought that issues of planning white paper or Sizewell C were mildly controversial, I give you Tim Pike. Tim, joking aside, Tim's been a fantastic contributor to the Norfolk construction scene and Norfolk and Suffolk's economy from his days at the Bank of England as an agent, now retired, still as an expert economist and also a growing expert in epidemiology. I sat for supper with Tim in early February this year and ready to talk about Brexit and the impact on the economy. And Tim told me to not worry about that. That's not the concern. The concern is the pandemic. And I must admit, in early February, I was, what pandemic? Tim's had great foresight, great knowledge, and I wonder if I can ask Tim to join us now. I think Claire's going to share slides, or maybe Katie's going to share slides for Tim. Have we got, can we hear Tim?
I'm just going to try and ask Tim to unmute the and I haven't got his slides. I think Claire has, potentially.
Yes, they should be up now. Can you see them?
Yeah, we can see the slides. Can we hear Tim? Tim, can you hear me?
Brilliant. Yeah, I can hear you. Oh.
Sorry, that was Saul asking whether or not Tim could hear me. I can pretend to be Tim, but be nowhere near as good. Tim, on the toolbar at the bottom, can you see the microphone? So let's check that excuse me, everybody, we'll just double check that Tim's here. Yeah. Tim, I think you're still on mute, so if you can unmute yourself with the toolbar at the bottom and microphone next to the time, next to the video. That's a pity.
Shall I try and unmute everybody if I can, and then perhaps everyone can try and mute themselves?
Yeah.
See if I can do that.
Really quiet.
No, it's totally greyed out. It's not letting me unmute Tim.
Okay. Can everybody still hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you put the slides back up, Claire?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Tim, if you do suddenly manage to find a way of doing this, please interrupt me at any time. But in the ignorance of that, perhaps I can just run through these quickly. So Tim, as I've already mentioned, is an ex-governor of agent at the Bank of England, and an expert epidemiologist. I have seen these slides, so if I can just go through them very quickly for you, I'll share the content in my amateurish way. Next to the next one, Claire. I think I'm going to do this really quickly. We know that the COVID cases are going through the roof right now, but remember we're measuring much more now than we ever did. Track and trace may not be perfect, but many more people are being tested than were back in March. So whilst the case numbers are high, we're not yet seeing the hospitalisation or the deaths, fortunately, that we were. But the direction of travel does seem pretty clear. Next slide. That point I just made about the death count, fortunately, thank goodness, is, as you can see, a very different place to what it was. If we can keep it down at that level, that may even be manageable. Next one. And it's interesting what's happening in other countries. In Sweden, their peak level, I think it's interesting the number of deaths per million in the population. So if I think Sweden's had 576 deaths per million people in its population, we've had 886. Sweden didn't lock down. Sweden stayed open and did what it did. And yet its cases have just fallen away. It's a different approach to how we deal with this virus. Next one. It's also interesting to note the age profile of the people that are unfortunately falling victim to this virus. The total number of deaths is, as we know, predominantly in the over 80 range. And if you look how few are in the category of 0 to 19, 20 to 39 years old, it's staggering how few people are affected who are young, and how many are affected who are already old and with underlying health conditions. I think the headline of that is of the 46,000 COVID reported deaths of people over 60, 1/3 of them were in care homes. When in reality, only 2% of the people in our country who are over 60 actually live in care homes. So a completely disproportionate number of deaths were in care homes. And a staggering side fact that of the under 40s, they're actually more likely to die in a road accident than they are from COVID. Next slide. So what's that done to the economy? We unsurprisingly, lockdowns, economic slowdowns has caused world GDP decline significantly this year. Between February and April, it was down 25%. February to August, down 9%. And then the recovery, the V shape that we hoped for, but many didn't believe would actually happen, did slow again in August. So there was a recovery, but that has slowed. Construction sector of the economy was down 44% in that same opening time scale, but that is predominantly because many construction sites just stopped. So actually it went to 0% output on many sites. Throughout the whole period, February right through to August, we're down 11%. So obviously there's a degree of recovery there. 11% down is better than 44% down, but the recovery again slowed in August. Our forecast for GDP for this year, we're going to be down 10%. Sweden is only going to be down 3.3. I think you can see now that the point that Tim is making is that Sweden's approach may have been the better one. as a consequence of GDP being what it is, our unemployment rate is doubling, and our prospects for the longer term are looking really uncertain, which leads to the question of how can we restore business and consumer confidence about a vaccine. We're anticipating UK growth officially, the stats say, of 7% next year. I think the question mark after that is to suggest that maybe that's not likely. Next slide. So without a vaccine, economic recovery looks to be remain really subdued in the short term. As people work more and more from home and rely on e-commerce, that will have a major impact on the high street and city centres. Combined with that, we've got some medium-term challenges. The Brexit settlement, we'll know soon enough where we're going in that regard. But will force us to restructure our trade towards rest of world type deals, and not only on Europe and the EU. Government and household indebtedness is going to have a big impact on our future growth, and relations with China, despite what we talked about earlier in regard to Sizewell C, but what's happened with Huawei and Hong Kong, that political and economic change is going to have an impact. Opportunities globally, trade deals, foreign inward investment. We have got a buoyant high-tech sector. And maybe once we're free of the EU, state aid and domestic procurement policies could reboot our national industries. Next slide. So EU longer term growth prospects, they are poor. If we look at what's happening in the EU, the single currency aspect of that, the central bank, the lack of state transfers, there is interesting massive income redistribution to Germany. There's another slide that will show a bit more of this in a second, but it's worth noting that the Italian economy hasn't grown at all in 20 years. And some might say that either EU over-regulation taxation has led to a lack of innovation and new business formation. There's been no EU new tech giants evolve. The whole of Europe, we haven't seen a tech company grow like we have across the pond. Perhaps EU are focused too much on regulation, and perhaps there's been persistent high structural youth unemployment in many of the EU nations. The free movement of labour and people has caused an outflow of skilled labour and capital from the poor nations. The demographics are awful. Europe has got an ageing and declining population, which harms productivity and increases debt burdens. I didn't know, but apparently Italy has the lowest birth rate in its 160-year history. And maybe this is Tim's slides, a focus on protectionism against the other areas in concentration and focus and supporting Europe. Next slide. So who's gained and who's lost from EU membership? This is sourced. So I think we're looking at the euros per resident in 2017 data, first column, and we can see that Germany and the Netherlands have done quite well. The average euro resident is up 3,000 euros in Germany and up 1,000 euros in the Netherlands. But the remainder are all down, down quite significantly. And corresponding with that, the number of unemployed who are under 25s in this period is, as of August 2020, as of this year, we've got unemployment in Germany is really quite low amongst under 25s. They're doing very well, and so the Netherlands, which is in line with the point that some countries have gained from EU membership whilst some have lost. But the countries that have lost, the next list of unemployment for under 25s in Italy, 32%, a third of the workforce is unemployed in Italy, of that younger generation, 19, 26, 43% in Spain are unemployed. And it would appear in the UK that we're a shade under 13% unemployment for under 25s. One might summarise from that slide that some countries have not gained from being EU members. And the final slide. This is which countries may have done well as a consequence of EU membership. Well, let's contrast EU membership and US companies. The biggest companies in the EU, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, founded 1854, very well established business, huge elite brands company. Market cap 247 billion. There, compared that with Shell, 102 billion, old company. SAP, bit of a tech company. Volkswagen, interesting that Volkswagen have had to behave inappropriately in order to drive their growth, and that's led to some questions about their reputation and ethics. But the average growth of these businesses, the EU businesses, the best EU businesses, has been pretty poor. If you contrast that with some of the US businesses, Apple, Exxon, Microsoft, Tesla, and even look at others like Google and Amazon, the growth figures, the market cap of these businesses is enormously higher. So some have succeeded and grown, but they're not in the EU. And some of our best companies in the EU have really not done very well. I've failed to convey the tone of Tim's slides at all well, but I think that's the essence of the message. The challenge from Tim would be to say, perhaps we should reflect on how we are coping with this virus, and should we have learned more lessons from countries such as Sweden. And don't be too concerned about Brexit, because the EU hasn't been great for us. That's Tim's view, I think. Forgive me, Tim, if you're listening and I've got that all wrong, but it's best I could do. If I can use that as a moment to wrap up quickly, just to thank you all for participating today. It's been really useful, really good. I think I've heard a lot and learned a lot. I'm really grateful for it. The subject normally in these meetings for Building Growth is about modern methods of construction, about sustainable growth, about low carbon, about skills. But we've been unable to focus on that so much since the pandemic has taken over. But I think the shift in emphasis, the participation is really appreciated, and that's absolutely terrific. I'm not going to run through a formal Q&A because I know it's difficult with such a large group, but if anybody's got any questions they haven't managed to bring up on the chat previously, then please do let me know or let Claire know, and we'll try and answer anything in particular. We'll circulate all of the slides that we had today. And can I just thank you all for joining us, thank the speakers in particular, and thank Katie Snell and Claire Haynes for bringing this all together. And finally, an apology from me to Tim Pike for failing to deliver his presentation with anything like the dignity or gravitas that he would have conveyed. Thank you all very much indeed, and I hope to enjoy your company again soon. Thank you.